Hi, welcome to this video on the new AWS Security Agent. If you joined me for the last video, we talked about the AWS DevOps Agent, and this time we're going to talk about the Security Agent. And at first, when I heard about the Security Agent, I thought maybe this was all about your AWS environment, your infrastructure, whether you've got, say, guard duty and other security services enabled, you've got logging enabled, but this is really more targeted, even though AWS Security Agent sounds very broad. This is really all about application security. So if you have access to code and you're deploying code into AWS, this security agent is going to help you out. And we're going to talk about all of all the forces that this brings to bear. And there's really three different services underneath this agent. I have no doubt this will get more broad over time. We're going to talk about this early preview release of the security agent. So why is AWS bringing this out? Well, I think across the industry, the problem is that companies aren't spending enough time focused on security. And I can say that because I see a lot of AWS environments. I perform security posture assessments, a lot of AWS environments. I've assessed large national banks running their applications, their consumer applications on AWS, and no one gets security perfectly. Always gaps to be remediated. Different companies take it more seriously than others, but the fact is, I mean, look at the numbers. 81% of organizations deploy vulnerable code just to make a deadline. 60% of organizations update their web applications weekly. So these are a lot of untested, possibly insecure code being deployed frequently. And then 75% test security monthly or even less frequently. So if you have, let's say, weekly sprints, you're always pushing changes out, but you only test security once a month or even less than that, you've got potentially a lot of vulnerabilities impacting your environment. At my company, we've already spoken to 4 different companies that have been compromised in the past on AWS recently in the past. Sometimes it's crypto mining, and customer found a $20,000 bill that was shocking to them. Someone had deployed hundreds of servers across multiple regions across the globe to do crypto mining. Sometimes it's ransomware or other malware. AWS knows that if you're going to be a happy customer on AWS, you need to make sure that any code you deploy is safe and secure. So they want to make this as quick and as efficient as possible. Now we don't know what this agent's going to cost. It's in preview, so it's free for you to test, to kick the tires on. Hopefully, this is not going to price the small companies, the SMB or mid-market companies out of testing, because if anyone's shopped around to have true pen tests performed, security is expensive to hire someone to do the security checking. This doesn't necessarily replace professional pen testing or code reviews, but it does give you an option above what most people do, which is I'm just going to ship it. So the impossible choice, as I've illustrated here, you ship vulnerable code to make the deadlines, or do you push off the revenue? You push off the changes that the business or the customers want because you're waiting for all the testing to be done, and teams are overwhelmed. This is AWS's answer to trying to make security from an application development perspective a lot easier to. So there are 3 main services within the AWS Security Agent, and I've listed them here. One is a design review. And when I first saw this, I kind of chuckled because I know a lot of times companies are deploying solutions, deploying new architecture, deploying software applications. There's not always a design on, not always a nice high level architectural diagram, not always a markdown or a Word file or a text file that explains it. But that doesn't mean you shouldn't. If it's a production application and it's going to be important to the business, doesn't have to be mission critical, just important to the business, you should have a design. That design helps you make sure that you're not skipping any corners, that you have a well thought out design. If in fact you have a design document or two, you can feed this into the security agent and it'll come back with what it sees as security concerns or security gaps. I'm not going to use a design review from a customer, so I had Claude from Anthropic actually create a design document, which is known to have some vulnerability. The second major feature of the security agent is a code review. Right now, it only supports GitHub, but you can have the security agent do a code review. Ideally, you do this before it gets deployed so you can fix any vulnerabilities in your application before you deploy it into test or production. And then lastly, penetration testing. Once everything is out there on the environment, or you have an existing, let's say, web application, mobile applications, you can use the security agent to perform penetration testing. So this isn't just simple, okay, I'm going to sniff the port and see what's listening. This is the security agent trying to exploit weaknesses, testing for security vulnerabilities in your input fields. But we're going to walk through this a little more in detail. So this whole design review is really trying to shift security left, which means traditionally, and I've been around long enough to know that the mantra used to be put code in production. When you're going to be audited, maybe a once a year audit, or you have external auditors for whatever reason want to come in and do an audit, at that point, everyone took security seriously and said, okay, we're going to have to pass this audit. So let's go ahead and make sure we have our ducks in here. That may have been fine back in the day when you're running on-prem. If you're running in the cloud, you are on public IP address range that easily discovered, and people are going to run port sniffers to try to find out where you're vulnerable. And so this is shifting security early on in the process. Give me something on design, give me a design document, give me a high-level architecture diagram, the security agent will call things out. And I'm actually going to have it review one so you see the kind of output that the security agent. For the code review, right now, you can only do a code review if you store your code repos on GitHub. You can't upload applications, you can't use code build within the AWS CI/CD services. It has to be GitHub. But I did create a GitHub repo for this purposes, so you'll see how that works. When you do a pull request, aka a PR, the agent is going to comment on that pull request and let you know in this block of code, this is insecure. So it gives you great feedback on what it discovered. It also gives you some remediation guidance. Great to have. And every time you do a pull request, you can set this up so the security agent is going to review every pull request and document if there's anything from a security perspective that looks unwise for you to go ahead and merge into. So what does code review look at? One is, if you're familiar with the OWASP top 10, those are the top 10 vulnerabilities in web-based applications. So it covers that, things like injection flaws, hard-coded secrets, if your encryption is not sufficient according to best practices, if you're vulnerable to cross-site scripting, aka XSS, it calls that out. You can also document some of your own company's or organization's security. So you can layer on top of what AWS provides by. From a developer experience, the security feedback arrives very quickly Once you do the pull request, you're going to see those comments. You get very quick response time from AWS. Not shoving that to another group that has to work that into the workflow. Not that that wouldn't be a good step, but from an AWS perspective, from an automation perspective, if you're not doing anything today to check your code for vulnerabilities, this is going to be a great service. It's in preview now, which means it's free. It means AWS is going to try to limit how much people do because they're not making money off it. However, as I documented here, you get up to 1,000 code reviews per month. That means each pull request is going to be a code. If you have up to 1,000 pull requests, those are going to be covered. If you exceed that, then you're going to have to go ahead and wait for the. Lastly, penetration testing. And this is going to be external pen. I know some firms do internal pen testing. This is external to your application, external to your web server, your load balancer, CloudFront. And it really goes through 4 different phases. You'll see that when you conduct a pen test, AWS will indicate which phase of the pen test it's in. First one is really AWS just discovering, or the agent rather, discovering what kind of documentation have you given me? How is the environment set up? Do I need credentials to log in? If your application requires a user ID and password. So this is really similar to someone who does a pen test manually as an individual, just getting ready, deciding how they're going to attack this web application. Next, static analysis is going to take a look at the code review findings. Are there already vulnerabilities that have been discovered that it should further attack? Is there anything new that it's going to discover? It wants to understand the application structure, all the attack surfaces, so it can design an accurate pen test. It's going to poke and it's going to probe as much as it can. That means throughout your application. So it's not just, oh, I'm going to hit the URL. I see one page, whether it's asking for credentials or maybe it's a navigation page. It's going to probe within all parts of your application. It then performs the pen test, 13 different risk categories that you get covered out of the box. As I said, you can present and ask for some additional security tests, but at least you have 13 out of the box. And then the last phase is finalizing and reporting, giving you some detailed findings. I'm going to show you an example of that. Keep in mind that this is probably the longest running feature. I think when I did a pen test, and I'll talk about the application in a minute, but I think it took about an hour and 40 minutes. So I'm going to kick one off so you see what it's like to kick one off. Then I'm going to jump to one that's already completed, because watching a video for an hour and a half of me just twiddling my thumbs, obviously. So here are the 13 risk categories. I'm not going to read these. You can take a look at these. You can look at the AWS documentation, but for being in preview, and for any company who's not doing any kind of pen testing today, this is a pretty good start in terms of kind of vulnerabilities that is. So when you do a pen test, AWS wants to make sure you don't try to pen test, say, Amazon.com, ESPN.com. So you are going to have to provide verification that you own the domain. I'm going to use jeffonaws.com. I use GoDaddy as my registrar. To set that up, I needed to put in a new DNS record for that domain. That text record really has a name value key pair that you're going to put into the DNS record. AWS is going to check that. And if you can prove you own the domain, then it's going to allow you to pay. I think if you didn't want to make a DNS entry, you could add a document. As long as you could provide a URL to that document, as long as it was available, that domain, then that's another secondary way to prove you own the domain. This stops you from pen testing other third-party websites. Obviously, not something that AWS wants to. This is very minimal impact, so you don't have to worry about doing the pen test after hours. It's really going to be very little load on your environment. Really no different than a person doing this just browsing your. So they take that safe testing approach. And then lastly, the data is protected. As it states here, all the data, at least now, is staying within the United States. The security agent is only available in Northern Virginia, also known as US E1. So the testing is never going to leave the US, not used to train AI models on what insecure websites look like. And so AWS has taken some steps to try to make sure that this is safe. So I just wanted to call out a couple of things to keep in mind about the security agent. If you, let's say, are mandated, say PCI, maybe HIPAA, if part of your regulatory requirements are you need to have a pen test done, this preview mode at this level of capabilities, I would say this is definitely not yet a replacement for professional pen testing. There's no SIM or CI/CD integration yet. This is really all limited to pull requests. Can't kick this into action when you're ready to deploy. So I expect that to change over time. Currently, it's only pull requests. I expect that, as I said, to change, that you can do this on demand. You could do this on a scheduled basis. But keep in mind, this is going to be triggered by a pull request within GitHub. There's no other way to. Certainly no guarantees of complete coverage as it lists here. It's AI. AI is non-determinate. The answer not determinate. So you can have potentially different answers at different times that you run it. I've run it a couple times already. I haven't seen any differences, but keep in mind AI can. Many people know if you use ChatGPT, Gemini, if you use Claude, you often get different answers. This is AWS saying this. Just be aware that there's no guarantee this is going to have coverage. And as I said, there's no scheduled way to kick this. Again, it's in preview. No reason for someone not to kick the tires on it now. I think it's only going to, just as with any other piece of software or any other agent. So how do we start working with a security agent? One is, not surprisingly, you need to access the AWS console. You need an account. And you're going to have to use USC1 because you won't be able to invoke the security agent in any other region. Second one, just like we did with the DevOps agent, you have to create an agent space. This is just a namespace that has, it's really a holding container for all your configuration. So if you have multiple applications, multiple workloads that your team works on, would typically have a different agent space for each. All your applications might have a different code repo dedicated to just that application. Within the agent space, you're going to connect to GitHub, connect to a repo. And in my example, I've just got a sync. I'll show you what it takes to. Next, you choose authentication, whether it's IAM or if you use Identity Center. Just for my own demo, I just selected IAM because it's a path of least resistance. I didn't want to worry about Identity Center for a demo environment, but you do have your option. Next, step 4 is you really set up your requirement. You look at the AWS managed security requirements. Do you have any optional custom security requirements that you want to add? Step 5, as you can see here, you need to install the GitHub app. That app is what is going to look for pull requests. If it sees a pull request, it's going to make a call out to AWS to run the code review. So you do need to connect your GitHub repo. I created a repo just for this purpose. I didn't want to take the time to write a vulnerable application. I had Claude from Anthropic do it for me in certainly a fraction of what I wanted. Insecure application. I wanted vulnerabilities such as A, B, and C, and it wrote some great Python Lambda scripts here in any. And just as a hint, if you are learning AWS or you use AWS professionally, you're not using Gen AI. It doesn't matter whether you use an AWS flavor of Gen AI, or as I've said before, Gemini, ChatGPT, Claude, especially with the AWS MCP servers, so that your Gen AI has access to proper AWS documentation. It keeps the hallucinations low. And so that's always a big help. I'm a solution architect, but there's some times instead of doing Google search, it's a lot easier for me to interact with Gen AI. I have some things that maybe I haven't seen. Step 6 is verify your domain. You give it a URL that contains a document with certain requirements in it, or you add a DNS text record, but you need to verify that you own the domain. Then you can run. Here I've documented the limitations: US East only, GitHub only. You can't use AWS code commit, no CI/CD pipeline, no scheduling, but still, no reason not to test it now and get familiar. Whether you're interviewing, whether you just want to learn AWS, increase your skills, highly recommend that you check out not only this security agent, but in my last video, the DevOps, all of root cause. So my demo app is pretty simple. I also had Claude do this diagram. Easy. But requests will come in across HTTPS on port 443. The API gateway will then direct the requests coming in to the appropriate Lambda function. There's a couple of different Lambda functions provided: list customers, login, get a customer, create a customer. The customers are stored in a DynamoDB table, and CloudWatch log kept from applications. And as I said, Claude developed these Lambda Python functions, and Claude made sure that these are vulnerable so that we have good finding to test out this. So let's go ahead and kick over to the security agent. So here I'm at the security agent. And if you haven't done anything yet with security agent, you're going to get to the screen. The first thing you're going to do is click on it. I already have one set up, so I can have a lot of the configuration already done. But for you, if you're going to create your first agent space, just click on that. You give it a name, you give it a description, create it. As I said, it's just a namespace, it's just a container. So a name and a description, and all the rest are configurations. So I'm going to click on my current agent space because this has all my configurations. I'm going to go over this left side navigation. So you've got your agent spaces will be listed here. Let me go into security. The managed security requirements are the ones that are out of the box. Scroll through, see 10 of those, click on one. It'll give you compliance criteria. What is it checking? Keep in mind, this is all AI based, so you're not going to see really anything other than text. Text is going to describe what that's going to check for. Customize it, you can disable it, then you can. But those are all the ones it checks out. Custom security requirements, create one yourself. Going to have whether there's a AWS managed control out there, details, a description, the applicability, etc. You can see this is nothing but text field. That's going to create your requirement. You need to enable that. Executed as security agent. Enabled is simply which rules have you enabled, which security checks. Over on the left-hand side is integrations. Right now, the only integration that it supports is with GitHub. Over here in this browser tab, I've got a code repo. I've got a document that we're going to feed in and the security agent look at my design document. I've got all my scripts, got a source folder, and I've got a README. So this was all built, known vulnerable, as Claude was real good about saying, warning, this has known code vulnerabilities. And so word to the wise, if you're going to test this out, if you're going to make your code willingly vulnerable, open to the internet, you have to be for it to be able to be pen tested with a URL. Just don't leave that out for very long. First thing I'm going to do after I record this, I'm going to shut down my API gateway. So if looking at that URL, they see the video, I'm going to stop them from trying to poke and prod into. But going back to the security agent, so let's suppose I was going to add another integration. As you can see here, there's only GitHub, there's GitLab, there's not Code Builder, it's only GitHub. Said it's going to change over time. The code repositories right now. So the first thing you need to do when you connect to GitHub is you're going to deploy the security agent GitHub application. As I said, this is what is really watching for requests. You install and authorize. It's going to have you log into your code repo. I'm not going to do that. This was very self-explanatory to me. I didn't have any challenges installing the GitHub application. If you do have any trouble, it's great to ask. You can ask, as you see here in the top right, you can ask MQ if you have any issues, your own Gen AI product. But if you have any issues, something's not working the way you want, Gen AI is usually a great way to go. I would do that before to do some random Google web searches, because the security agent and the DevOps agent are pretty new. There's starting to be some videos released out. There's starting to be some how-to articles on Medium, on LinkedIn, etc. But don't be afraid to use Gen AI, even a free instance of ChatGPT or Claude, to have it help you. So you're going to have to go ahead and install that GitHub application. There's two different GitHub account types it supports, user or organization, and then you can just give a label to the registry. Do this a second time because I've already installed the GitHub application, but that gives you a feel for. And then lastly, we have settings. And the settings are pretty simple. It has created a service role for me because I configured all this previously as domain, as the name of the application, as an ID. Settings are pretty sparse, pretty simple. So going back to the agent space, I'm going to enter my agent space because I covered all the navigation. And up at the top is where you see design review, the three different features that it offers today. A design review that we spoke about, a code review that we spoke about, and the pen testing. I'm going to walk through these one at a time. And down here below, you've got tabs for the web app. Now, to access the web application takes you to a different page. If I just click on that, I'll just demo how that works. I think this is where AWS has realized that they need to convey information like they did on the DevOps agent that doesn't fit within the AWS portal UI. So trying to fit everything these agents do, not now, but as these agents continue to get more robust and more sophisticated, wouldn't be surprised if more and more we see the AWS console taking you to a website, a web page, just because they can be a lot more robust on the internet. So down here, access web app. That's because the web app is going to do two things for you. One, as you can see here, if you want to do a design review, which I'm going to do in a minute, have to be in the web application. Code review all happens within GitHub repo. I'm going to demo that. Pen testing is kicked off in the web app. So if you think about it, the AWS console allows you to configure everything. You can't kick anything off in there. You're going to kick things off either in the web application, the web page, outside of the console, or you're going to do that with a pull request. Click on the design review. This is really just showing those, again, the enabled security requirements that come out of the box. On the code review, it's going to show that, hey, I've got a repo that's already configured and I integration already configured with GitHub. Pen test is to show that, hey, I have a domain, got a host name API, so api.jeff.aws.com. Did put a DNS text record out there, did that with GoDaddy. You can get domain names pretty cheap. Not going to get genai.com cheap, but for instance, I have jefffudge.com. So you get a pretty unique domain name that no one else really is trying to bid on. You can get domain names pretty cheap. If you need to test, you could also use Route 53 if you're on AWS and it's not a domain you already own. You could do that with Route 53. And then on the VPCs, I didn't create a VPC. I let AWS go ahead, temporarily build up a VPC and tear it down. Part of the pen test shows all the different Lambda functions that I have that is a pen test, so you understand that main of application code that is pen test. I didn't need to define any secrets. I don't use any S3 buckets. It creates a service role itself. It's documenting what service role it created within AWS GitHub. So let's do a design review. So I'm over here in the security agent. So if I start the web app, it's up, web app opened. We're going to click on design review. You can see I have a couple already, but this runs pretty quickly. So let me go ahead and create a new one. Again, if you don't have any documentation for your web apps, this may not help you, especially if your application already exists. Maybe how it exists today is not even close to resembling what early documentation you have. Or you can do like I did and just have GenAI. So I just give it a name. This is the third one. Design view number 3. I'm going to choose a font. So I've already, I've done this before. So remembered I was in the docs folder for all my code repository that flown out of GitHub. So I'm going to point to that. And before I kick this off, I want to show you what that markdown file looks like. So this is the fictional architecture design document. Executive summary, system overview, scope, what kind of data. Mentions PII because I expect that the security agent is going to say, oh, you've got some very sensitive data in there. That PII was put in there from Claude and myself because we knew that this would trigger some extra careful screening for the security agent. Talked about what kind of components. Again, this documentation helps security agent understand what to probe for. More that a pen tester understands about the target, more sophisticated and more complete a pen test can be. This says architecture diagram. You could really say this is just a packet data flow, just like below. But it does demonstrate that, hey, a user on the internet is sending an HTTP request. The API gateway is going to process that. Want to route that to the appropriate Lambda function. Lambda function then is DynamoDB as assistance for all the customers. Then defines what are the API endpoints so that the security agent understands what API endpoints it needs to check out. Got a data model for the security agent to understand. It listed some security considerations. If you do your own documentation, here's the kind of considerations you'd want to document. But this is everything from security considerations, where is it deployed, what kind of monitoring. So again, just trying to give it a pretty complete, at least for 5 different Lambda scripts, all very small, a pretty complete design document for it to be. So I've called it Design Review 3. I've loaded the design. Let's go ahead and start that. Memory serves, this takes about 30 seconds. So not as with any AWS portal, not really a great way for it to dynamically tell you if it's done. You're going to have to keep refreshing the screen. Right now, there is no convenient refresh, so you can just refresh the browser, or you can click on View Details. That will paint the screen. Okay, so now this is telling us that it's so it completed January 15th at 6:56 a.m. Eastern Standard, C-5. That was based on you have multiple design documents. It didn't find any of the security checks to be compliant. That was by design. It wouldn't be much fun for me to say, oh, guess what? My code is great. I did want to show what kind of findings. And here's one of my nitpicks. It says download report. Great, I'm going to get this nice report, non-compliant findings, that it's easier to digest. You click on download report. I want to pull that up. AWS does this this is the report. Sure, you can wrap the columns, you can wrap the text, you can put some visual dividers in here. I don't consider that a report. I consider that data. So it'd be nice to have a detailed report, but if you need everything in a spreadsheet, you can download the data there. This is really, for all intents and purposes, the report. Unfortunately, at least in previewed mode, you can't really ban these, see them all in a scrollable window. You can look at them one at a time. Authentication best practices. This is saying, based on your design document, it looks like you've got no multi-factor, got weak access. Gives you remediation guidance, but you're going to have to do this one at a time. Here, log protection, it doesn't see any indication that it's protecting the system logs. You're familiar with security tactics to prevent malicious actors from destroying their evidence of being there. They're going to always try to eliminate, delete, or modify the logs. Secure by default, privilege access. Again, I'm not going to go through all of these, but each one has a comment that explains why, after looking at your design document, what you need to consider. Mediation. I think they could do a lot more with porting, but coming up with all this information from a design document, pretty good. Some of you may be thinking, why couldn't I just, with ChatGPT, Gemini, Claude, ask it to do the same? And that's a good point. I would hope that the AWS security agent has been trained a lot more heavily on all things AWS, best practices on secure development. As a test, you could always test that. I didn't have time to do that. Pretty busy over the last couple of weeks, but I would expect that AWS ideally has their machine learning and their LLM trained more specifically. But your mileage may vary. You might be able to go ahead and have an AI, your choice, do this. but it's nice to have all this documented within the AWS. So that is how the security agent will take a look at your design documentation and let you know, hey, here are some things. Not unlike if you had, let's say, a security team inside your organization and you had a design and you wanted back, give you some feedback. This is serving the same purpose, but as you could tell, that was fast. So if I go back to outside, pull up anything from Keeper. So that was a design review. The code review, I'll click on the GitHub repos. This is just showing, okay, there's a GitHub repo and you configured it. Keep in mind right now, there's nothing you can do within the console to get a code review executed. And it kind of took my brain a while to figure that out. It's like, okay, what button do I push? How happen? Go over to my GitHub repo. What happens is when you do a pull request, AWS agent is going to be invoked. If you look at your pull request, before it completes, you're going to see a little comment that says the security agent is currently reviewing this pull request. It only took a couple minutes. This, as you can tell, I did this 4 days ago. So the security agent has been complete. It did give me feedback. And so I wanted to give you a feel, even though I'm not going to simulate GitHub pull request, certainly not a GitHub expert. I'm more infrastructure and solution architecture than a developer. Developer days are long behind. But I wanted to focus on what kind of comments, what kind of insight can you expect from the security agent code review. And this is just a little verbiage saying this is what it's going to show you. This first one was done in Python script called payment handlers. What is the issue? Saying access credentials should not be hard coded. We had this dummy line that said, hey, here's a API key. You can look at that key, you can copy and paste it. That's just purely fictional, I promise you. And as I said, I'm going to remove my public API. Oh, recorded. But the agent is saying, hey, you don't want to hard code that. And for best practices, give you a link for managing Stripe API keys. It even says, hey, that looks like a Stripe API key for electronic payments, digital payments. Here's the Stripe API key management. So pretty robust as you would expect from any Gen AI response, very targeted to what it's looking for. So that was one. Another finding was operating system shell commands using unsanitized user input. So it could tell I didn't try to sanitize, I didn't try to remove any special characters. So anytime you have unsanitized user input, it's going to call that out. This shows me my code, line 73 through 75. It says, oh, by the way, I'm not showing the code, but you've done this again in a different line within the Python script. Gives you a recommendation, gives you a link to this next one. Is saying, hey, once again, you've got unsanitized input. Again, put there intentionally. This one is about the URL, saying, hey, how do you know that the URL that Python is going to launch is safe? What if that URL starts with FTP? What if that URL starts with file? What if a malicious attacker, instead of using HTTP, HTTPS, says, oh, you're going to let me give you a URL? Well, let me just say file, try to access your hard drive. Hey, yes, that's a valid Python function, URL open, but you haven't checked to make sure that URL. So those are ones that caught out. It really caught out the ones that I expected to find by looking at the code. then you can go ahead, resolve those. Once you're okay with any remediation, you could do another pull request. If that's clean, go ahead and merge that into, say, a main branch. This gives you a feel for the kind of comments, how you interact. I said before, keep in mind, this is kind of only going to be kicked off by a pull request. So if you're going to do your own little demo or your own little lab, you're going to have to get at least familiar enough with GitHub today, because that's the only repository that's supported. You're going to have to do a pull request, because that will kick off the security. And then the last one we need to talk about is the pen test. You look over here, penetration testing. We're going to start that in. But before we do that, I'm going to go ahead and pull up configuration, penetration test here. So if I hadn't added a domain, this is what I had to do the first time. I clicked on add domain. If it's a Route 53 hosted zone, then you put that. Otherwise, all I did is I put in API Jeff on AWS.com, so it knew what domain to pen test. Then it says, hey, you want to give me a route, which is really a URL to a document. I'm going to tell you what needs to be in the document. They do this because they understand just because you have some control over domain doesn't mean that your organization gave you access to your DNS. Typically, if you're a developer, no organization is give you the ability to just whale on the DNS entries and create and delete any, especially if it's a production. So the HTTP route to give a path to a document is typically going to be a lot safer for an organization to let you have control over than the DNS. For my domain, I had access to DNS via GoDaddy, so I just configured that. It will then, as you can see here, once you define that, you're going to have to wait a couple minutes. Once that checks out cleanly, and I had made a mistake in my DNS record, it came back and told me I failed verification. I rearranged something within my DNS record, and it's successfully. When it is verified is when penetration testing is going to say ready. As I said, this is started in the web app, so go ahead, just click on that. That's going to dump you into not the pen test. This is going to dump you into the security agent web page. Over on the left-hand side, if you want to conduct a pen test, as you can see, I've already done one. I am going to go ahead and start one, but as I said, that took, I think, about an hour and a half. But let me start one so you can see how it starts, and then I'm going to show you the one I completed back on January. If I say, create a new one, see that. All this pen test 2. Target URLs, verified domains. That's my domain. What is the target URL? I'm just API. So if you needed to add a second domain, you can add as many as you want. I one URLs. One. If for some reason, yes, because you know some of these may be causing false positives on your application, but you could limit this to just a single test, or you can say everything. I'm not going to include any risk types. I want to know how risky is my web application, so I'll leave that blank. If there's any URLs you don't want it to test, I'm not going to include anything. That might be great if you want to partition the test, it run a little more quickly. Maybe you only want to do certain blocks, maybe a large complication, or any additional URLs to pen test within that domain, custom headers. In terms of the role, I just had it create a role. I said, yes, that's fine. On yourself. Log group, I'm not going to provide a log group. If you don't, as it says here, the security agent's going to create one. I'm going to create one for me. I'm not doing that either. This one, since it's in preview, I don't know how many people will be comfortable. Yeah, go ahead and whack out my code and try to remediate that yourself. Hopefully you're good at developing. Sometimes Gen AI is, sometimes it isn't. I've probably had Claude write about 30,000 lines of code. It's an iterative process. First time you're 80%, 20, now 90%. So it's an iterative process. Right now, I would recommend, unless it's throwaway code where you can roll back the changes easily. I did not turn on. So you click on test and you can tell I didn't read the directions. Full characters, no spaces. I'm just do. VPC, I'm going to leave blank. Authentication, my test application doesn't require a user ID and password, so I don't have to give it any credentials. Any other learning resources, any other design documents, it already knows about my design document. I did the design review, so adding it at this point would just be redundant, so I'm not going to give anything else since create the pen. So now it is created. Keep in mind, not running, but it's ready to run the pen test. Go ahead and please confirm you're ready to begin the test, because what it's saying is once you kick it off, any of your configuration changes aren't going to apply to the. Click on start run. And so now it's in progress. It's going to be in progress quite some time. So I'm going to go ahead and let that run in the background, but I'm going to skip ahead and go back to the one that I already completed a few days ago, just so you can see the output. Click on that pen test conducted. And here's how you can tell what kind of feedback are you. Well, under pen test runs, it's just going to show you the two runs. One that I had stopped because I needed to change something. Here's the one that see here, only 5 Lambda programs, maybe less than 500 lines of code, and ran 2 hours. Well, it's going to probe, plan, and test. Would this get faster once it's out of preview and they're charging for it? Probably. But since they're giving you away all these compute hours to run their LLM, to run this service, my guess is it's slower now than it will be once. So I can go ahead and click on that pen test. It's going to show an overview. Hey, there were 4 critical findings. There were 4 high findings. There were 2 medium findings. It's going to show all the risk types over here. It's going to show you just some high-level overview information on this page. But the real meat is going to be in the findings. Test logs. This is really just showing you more, what are all the tasks that it did, what kind of activities did it do, but findings is where the meat really. Not surprisingly, there's nowhere on here that says create a nice report. So this is your report. You can't even download this into CSV for Excel. So this is really what you get now. Will that change once it's out of preview? I would hope. But all the findings are listed here in terms of criticality. It lists the critical, the confidence here, and saying, hey, pretty confident that have an unauthenticated customer account deletion means you can delete any customer. You don't have to be authenticated owning that. Or being an admin. Confirm the mass assignment. Complete authentication bypass. You don't even have to get authenticated. Notice that my API gateway, whether you're authenticated or not, as long as you called, say, a delete API endpoint, says, oh, fine. You want to delete something? by all means, let's go ahead and delete. No SQL injection. You want to be careful about SQL injection, not sanitizing your input. Some of these are going to be duplicates from what it called out in code. Some of these are going to be duplicates from what we saw in the design review. But then they list the highs and the confidence, and then they're going to, for each one of these, it's going to show the risk score. It's 0 to 10. 9.8 is almost as bad as Git. Shows the logs of what it did. How did it validate that this was a finding? Then it gives a description. If you want to reproduce that yourself, because the proof is in the pudding, it gives great instructions. Okay, how can you test this yourself? Actually be able to see the experience happening. If you had to document this or give this information to a developer sometimes will say, I need to see it to believe it because I believe my code is good. And this is a good way. If you needed to manually replay the vulnerability to recreate it, the risk reasoning, why is it a 9.8? They give you all the impact statements here. So this should give you a good feel for what does that pen test do. As I said, it done very quickly. You pretty much let it run in the background. Come back in a couple hours, see if it's done. I think I mentioned if it's a very large, complex application, you might want to limit the URLs or might limit how many domains you're actually going to check. Certainly don't want one that's going to run for 8 hours, then come back with it. But I think if you have a small application or need to just design a Python scripts to check out, if you have a website that maybe you've written, whether it's .NET, Python, most of the common languages are all supported with the code review. Certainly from a pen test, the pen test is interacting with the URLs over HTTPS daily or HTTP. It's not going to care what your language is. The pen test is just acting at. So that really, in a nutshell, is the demo of the security agent. I'm hoping that gives you a feel for the three major services: design review, code review, and pen test, what those interactions look like within AWS console, web application. Some of the things I liked and didn't like. To me, some of the configuration wasn't always straightforward. Everything looked good. I installed the GitHub application, but I was doing pull requests and it wasn't kicking off. I had to use GenAI, Claude in my case, to try to help me troubleshoot that. Finally, it started working. Wasn't sure what I changed, if anything. So because a pull request kicks it off, there really was nowhere that I knew to look to see there an error somewhere in a log. So it wasn't always straightforward. I expect that to get better as this gets out of preview. People continue to give feedback on what they don't like. I do like that it reviews design documents. You can tailor it with your own custom security requirements outside of the 13 it has out of the box. Certainly becomes less expensive and probably more efficient than how a lot of things are done manually or even done not at all. So I like that. My experience is usually mid-market to enterprise size organizations take security testing of their application code pretty seriously. If you're a small to mid-sized business, less so. So I think this makes this a lot easier for companies that don't have the same budgets as the large companies. It is a bummer that AWS code commit. If you remember AWS code commit, AWS said, we're moving away from our own proprietary code repo. We suggest you use GitLab or GitHub. They reversed directions because so many customers had problems with that. So code commit will be added. I'm sure it's on the roadmap, just not support. You will have to use GitHub, at least for now. So thanks for watching that. What's next in my series? I'm big on AWS security. So my next video is going to be all about the security announcements that were made at pre-invent, right before reInvent at December of 2025. I'm going to talk about the security announcements I found very compelling. I think you need to be informed about. As always, thanks for watching. If you have any comments, please let me know. If you have any issues with the security agent, you have any feedback on what you like and don't like, keep in mind that's valuable to anyone else that watches these videos.